All right, folks. Sorry for some early technical difficulties, but we are now live for March 2019's Fic Night. After a hiatus in February for our site-wide awards at hpfanfic.com, aka HPFT, we are back this month featuring a story by Joey, aka Crestwood, and the story is titled How Long? It is a story centering around Albus Potter and Scorpius Malfoy, and it was originally entered for a challenge in Fire Frenzy's Slytherin Centric Challenge. So here you'll see an Albus Potter who is a Slytherin. I know there's almost any house's characterization for Albus, but that is the one that features in this story. And so without further ado, especially with our technical difficulties delays, I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into it. This is How Long by Crestwood on HPFT. We've seen those mountains, kneeling, Felton and gray. We thought our very hearts would up and melt away. We fell together in those mountains, our first awkward embrace overseen by the snow-capped Alps. His blonde hair was white in the summer, almost seeming to reflect the sunlight as it overstayed its welcome, where time flayed and bruised most things. It only nourished my impression of him. I said, "Darling, darling, dance for me. In the light you will never be judged." I wanted a clear view of him, always. Entangled lovers, a thicket of limbs, an intricate cadence lives in us both. I moved as he moved, made in his image. A low hum filled my ears. I was numb to the specifics of certain moments, and so very lucid to the next. Though felt deeply, we struggled to understand what we had on our hands. He lingered in my lungs, as arresting as the day we met. Material love could end. Some things do not. We ran through the shallow waters, the surf rushing to meet the shore. Hardly a worry to be found as far as eyesight stretched. He filled the cracks in who I was. I did not ask much of him, only that he did not leave without warning. I was all clenched fists, bloodshot eyes, nervous glances. He was calm, level, constant. A gust of wind could have taken me at our peak. I felt lighter than I ever had. I dreamed you were skipping little stones across the surface of the water, frowning at the angle where they were lost and slipped under forever. In a mud cloud, mica spangled, like the sky had been breathing on a mirror. I traced my fingers along his outstretched arms, my touch gifting goosebumps to the exposed skin that lay motionless across my torso. There we were, gently lifting ourselves out of the depths of the kind of sleep you have when you're content to live inside of your thoughts for as long as you can. I dreamt of you, Scorpius. What of me? His voice had yet to shake off the rasp of the morning. I recounted the shimmer of the lake, rippling under the weight of the flattest pebbles he could sift out of the soil. Scorpius showed me how to best skip them along the surface. 5, 6, 7 times. He counted each successive attempt, in competition with himself, always. I pulled my hat lower, shielding myself from the chill. It was a bitter season, and I rested easy in my assumption that we were unlikely to be interrupted. Leaves spiraled in the wind, trapped in an unending migration. I could feel how alive it all was. And then I awoke. Anyhow, I sat by your side, by the water. You taught me the names of the stars overhead that I wrote down in my ledger. He had always operated on the largest scale possible, and of course, found himself particularly drawn to the constellations. He could pick them out of the night sky like old friends. Soon, I could see what he saw, Vega, Capella, Scythe, Antares, and what a sight. I would switch the names around and fumble the memories left and right, but the thought was enough for him. The thought was more than enough. We traveled the world, never visiting the same place twice. In new places, we could let our guard down. We could be other people. We walked hand in hand through the streets, feeling as ordinary as we ever had in our lives. I wanted to disappear into this new role. I'd been acting my whole life. What harm could another performance bring? As it was, we eventually made our way back to our own lives. I could not be said to prefer them. Still, we found pockets of time to slip away out of spaces we'd known. These were the days that lived on. In the hills, we could see the world for miles, in all directions. Birds swept in and out of the area, rising and falling with the air's current. The simplicity of the landscape was its very draw, each tract of land a replica of its surroundings. We did not care where we were. I felt tall in his presence. He lifted me up, always. Though all I knew of the rote universe were those Pleiades loosed in December, I promised you I'd set them to verse so I'd always remember. I transcribed his teachings as best I could. There were thousands of notes that I'd scribbled, and the work to condense them was arduous. Do I cut away Alnitak? Could I fit Neckar in with the rest? His birthday fast approached, and I had only the scraps of an idea pieced together haphazardly. All night I worked, for a week straight, hardly a break to eat and drink. Who'd known that the most thoughtful gifts demanded such consideration? I hadn't made things easy on myself, admittedly, consumed as I'd allowed myself to become. My deliberate phrasing was born of an obsession with finding the balance between what I wanted to say and what I wanted him to understand. The final product filled me with a pride I'd not known, joy in the form of melody, a genuine monument to my dedication to his talents, interest, and being. I could sing it 100 times over and never tire. I hummed it when we could not be together, always. The sky is full of the stars that assume their place in our universe. I see them as part of a god-awful plot. The narrative twists and it turns. If words they are meant to help circumvent confusion, then how does it fit that I cannot find in the eye of my mind the spaces in which they should sit? Draconis is near in the damn atmosphere to Leonis to which it relates. The river it ends with Akamar, and then its twin Akarnar remains. And all the while, Izar runs wild, not meeting a soul like itself, till a binary star by the surname Menkar reveals that it's out there as well. Threw the window wide and cried, Amen, Amen, Amen. The whole world stopped to hear you hollering. When we decided to throw open the door we'd been hiding behind, there was an agreement that our parents should be the first to know. We felt we owed that at least, as little as we'd shared over the years. My father was an understanding man, one who would hear us out and mull his conclusions for what felt like ages. Through my mother's gasps of shock and yelps of congratulations, he stood still and silent as the statues that had cropped up all over the world, the ones that had always shaken me to my core. Who could see themselves in stone and not feel an unnatural sensation? He'd never known that his only son had gotten something past him. Hadn't he paid attention? Was he too wrapped up in his career? Tears worked their way down his face as he unexpectedly pulled us into his chest. I did not originally mean to keep things from anyone, but how could you tell something you yourself were only faintly aware of, something that could not be measured? I warned myself against high hopes, but again, they got the best of me. Draco Malfoy looked at me with new eyes. If you meant something to Scorpius, you meant something to him. Badgers thought they had a monopoly on loyalty, but I assure you, Slytherin would burn the world down for the ones they loved without first asking why it must be done. There was something caught in my throat. I found I could not speak. Thankfully, conversation was not needed in a time like this, as each of us found ourselves lost in the recesses of our thoughts, recontextualizing years and years of quiet assumptions. Things, to say the least, would be different now. When we announced it out loud, I felt free. Our peers could be damned if they didn't like it. No one could feel what I felt, and no one could speak for me or for him. Underneath my anxiety was anticipation. Whatever happens, I told him, we have each other, always. The talk in the town's becoming downright sickening. In due time we will see the far buttes lit by a flare. I've seen your bravery, and I will follow you there. He was unfazed by the whispers, rumors, and the increasingly invasive questions. Of course, we'd always had the spotlight on us. Him, a Malfoy, me, a Potter. There was something different about this, something sinister. It felt too calculated to be fueled by curiosity. No, this was much more cynical than that. But still, he assured me it'd come and go. We were the hot topic of the moment, but soon there'd be another thing of the now. I drew strength from his demeanor, always. As for the good, we were inundated by Owl Post following our big announcement. While we hadn't kept up as much as we should have, our friends from school slowly sent their regards, an ongoing ovation. Snakes had a reputation for conservatism, but it was hardly true of us any longer. We were proof that they could always keep a secret and protect their own. While there was a general awareness in the dungeons that we were both queer, it was never confirmed that we'd come together. I felt a great warmth in my chest to have the support of those closest to us. I understood why the opinion of strangers mattered so little to him then. And I make this claim, and I'm not ashamed to say I know you better. What they've seen is just a beam of your sun that banishes winter. Though he kept a brave face through so much of the abuse we endured, it was the magazine article that finally broke him. Suddenly I was him and he was me. I comforted him the best way I knew how. They could write 1,000 stories if they'd like, I said. How easy it was to cast us in a disparaging light. How easy it was to believe. Their biggest mistake was signing their names to the piece. As I said, a Slytherin would burn the world down if need be. I do not regret my actions, and surely Witch Weekly could use an editor regardless. I assured him there would be no further write-ups on our personal lives. He kissed me deeply, without hesitation. They'd watch us, always. I didn't care. Let us go, though we know it's a hopeless endeavor. The ties that bind, they are barbed and spined, and hold us close forever. We were huddled in our dormitory, contemplating the decision we were about to make. In many ways, we'd already half made it, considering the deflection it'd take to turn back at this point. Every bit of me was screaming to find a way. I struggled to remember why I'd agreed to this in the first place. Do you think this is a good idea? I was alternating between biting my nails and strenuously running my fingers through my hair, both of my nervous tics working overtime. We'll be okay if we do it together. It'll overwhelm them so much they'll just accept it, he grinned. I often wondered how he was able to keep such a calm exterior. We'd called all of our friends together to turn the whole thing into one big reveal. I knew there was no way I'd be able to go through this more than once. What's up, guys? Asked Sebastian. Charlotte chimed in. Yeah, what's the big announcement? Yeah, I started. Look, we're both gay. Me and Albus. We want to date boys. Scorpius hastily explained the gist of it all, and I cringed, eyes closed, prepared for the worst. For a while, there was nothing. And then, scattered giggles. I opened my eyes, and our friends were sat there in various states of glee. Was that really all there was to it? Laughed Gabby. Yeah, that was the most anticlimactic moment of my life, man. Sebastian was standing up to leave the common room. Scorpius asked a question on my mind. What? Oh, come off it. You didn't realize we knew? Charlotte was in disbelief. Didn't even know you two were meant to be in the closet, said Gabby. Well, that's great. I threw my hands in the air, exasperated. Sebastian seemed legitimately confused. What do you think we thought about you and Scotty Hopkins, Albus? I don't know. We could have just been friends. All the times we saw you holding hands and you went off together for Hogsmeade and never. Charlotte started. Okay, I get it, I interrupted. We weren't subtle. So you guys are totally cool with it? Scorpius's voice trembled. Of course, they said nearly in unison. Abby flashed her wide smile. We're your best friends, always. Landlocked in bodies that don't keep, dumbstruck with the sweetness of being. How many different ways could I tell him I love him? I could buy him a book he'd had his eye on without him having to ask. I could lay out his dress robes for him before the 10-year reunion I knew he was feeling nervous about. I could serenade him with his favorite song that I spent a week committing to memory. I could just say I love you. We had time. There was no rush. The nature of these things is unstable, but I knew we'd rather fall together than stand alone. That much became clear. I could not, would not, live without you. The snowfall was light, sheathing everything in sight with a picturesque layer of the soft white matter. We wander without aim through the freezing cold dunes, our footprints telling a story. He pulled me onto the ground, both of us making angels side by side. I wouldn't have asked to be anywhere but there. Oh, there were no problems to be had there. I couldn't have let him go if it would have saved my life. What life there would be left to live would hold no interest. Our worlds were intertwined, always. I chose to be with him, and he chose to be with me. Things had never been better. All right, folks. So that was, as I said before, if you're just joining us, How Long by Joey, aka Crestwood. Um, and we are fortunate enough to have Joey with us. I think he is going to jump back on here in a second with uh, with his mic back on. Um, but as ever, while we're waiting for that, I will go ahead and kind of jump in with some thoughts that I may follow up with some questions on as well once he's back here. Um, one of the things that I honestly did not pay attention to because I generally speaking, if you've seen before, know that I don't really read these story shells before I read the actual story. Um, and so one of the things that I had not picked up on originally was that this was also intended to be something of a song fic. I'll confess that I did not listen to the song. I was told it was 12 minutes in the author's note, so I did not listen to the song. But if you check out the author's note yourself at the bottom of the story, you can kind of get a lot of background on that as a foundation for the story. And you can always go check it out as well. Having heard a lot of the lyrics in italics throughout the story, which you know are hopefully sounded a little bit more poetic, difficult to read in practice, not knowing the song. But that song is Emily by Joanna Newsom. And so I think we've got Joey back with us. Joey, you there?
Yes, I am. Hello.
Hello, hello. So glad to have you back with us for questions about the story. The first thing I wanted to address was kind of the a cadence that I noticed in it throughout. Before reading the story shell, even and actually knowing that the the italicized portions were a song rather than excerpts from poems or even more deliberately melodic lines that you had entirely written. It had a real, um, I don't want to say musical, but it definitely had a melodic tone to it. How did you capture that between in the pieces between those excerpts from the song?
Well, I originally set out to have this piece be entirely a poem. My idea originally was almost no prose. Um, and somewhere along the way, I kind of went back on that, and I was thinking maybe I could just do it all prose, and I couldn't decide which would be better. And then I found this song that fit so perfectly with the idea that I had, that it made me it kind of pulled me apart in two. And I can't remember who I was speaking to, but I brought up this dilemma I was having, and they just said, "Why not both?" So I sort of ended up getting into this weird middle area where it was sort of poetic, it was sort of song-like, but I still kept it in this narrative form. So I think that's just kind of where the style of this piece came from.
Gotcha. Now, I think you mentioned that you had in search of deciding which direction to go, found this song. Is it an artist that you typically listen to? Is it a song you've heard before, or how did you track the song inspiration down?
Okay, yeah, this is definitely a song that I've listened to many times. But one thing about Joanna Newsom is she refuses to put her music on Spotify because she doesn't like them as a company. So for I mostly use Spotify to listen to music. So when I find Joanna Newsom, a lot of times I'll be on YouTube or somewhere else, and I'll be searching around, and I'll just think, "Huh, I haven't listened to her in a while." And I stumbled across it one day, and I truly listened to the lyrics for whatever reason that day. And as I listened, I realized it had a lot in common with the story I was writing. And it just fits so perfectly that I realized I had to incorporate it somehow.
Very, very cool. I know you mentioned in your author's note that one of the things that also fit with the story is the characters' different interests. With I believe it was Scorpius always being interested in astronomy, and Albus being sort of more of the writer slash poet. Are those things that came later when you decided to do it under this structure, or are they things that you sort of thought about from the beginning?
Those were things that I thought about from the beginning, in terms that I knew that Albus had to write a song for Scorpius, and I knew that Scorpius had to be very into astronomy. But it came after the song where I decided that I would put the actual song that Albus wrote into the story itself.
Okay, okay. One of the things that I also noticed and that I really liked about the story was that the lowercase title seemed to actually mesh with both the kind of oscillating feelings, I guess, from seeming uncertainty or worry, at least on Albus's part, is probably the better word, to more certainty as things progressed, to ultimately um, hard to capture, I guess, in a word, but ultimately feeling this back to this lowercase that was not seemingly uncertainty, but more a comfort level both in themselves and in the outside world. Um, Obviously, armchair writers have their own theories about why these things go on. So, what was your aim with the capitalization differences in the story?
Well, I've had a lot of reviews mention the capitalization and the things that they've taken from it, and I've actually had my own eyes opened now to different ways people can interpret it. I think one thing that I really enjoyed that I got in a review from, I believe it was Jane or Bunbury, said that she felt the lowercase sections were more of a direct portal into Albus's mind, in terms that she said nothing could get in between his thoughts and the reader, even, like the standards of English, even the written word. It was just
Mhm.
straight from him to us. And I thought that was a really interesting perspective.
Yeah, definitely. I had not thought about that way either. So that's definitely a unique perspective, and I think it's cool that you were able to come up with a style that was able to get so many different interpretations. Because I think that kind of speaks to the quality of the story and how incredible that it is. At least in I think mine and many other people in our community's opinion.
Yeah.
Um, we do have a question from Maddie in the chat right now, who asked how you decided to write the story from Albus's POV instead of Scorpius.
Okay, that's actually a good question. Um, I think ultimately what made me decide to write it from Albus's point of view was that I knew I wanted it to be melodic, and Albus was the songwriter. So I thought that that would be more fitting than having it be the one that is more of a technical thinker.
Gotcha. With and this is jumping back a little bit, but with those two interests, for them was Scorpius's sort of at all born out of the fact of all the constellations and the family names of his family and families that they're associated with, or no?
Yeah, absolutely, it was. I even in all of the star names that I use, many of them are actually tied into the constellation that Scorpius is named after. And I even use Draconis, which, is the basis for his dad's name. And I definitely thought about that going into the story.
For people who do not know, is there any particular interaction between those constellations or other stars that you mentioned, um, and Scorpius or Draco that you feel like was particularly important to include?
Oh yeah, yeah. There was definitely some interesting things that I put into the song that Albus wrote, in that he sort of was making jokes about the stars that he had learned, such as I believe it was Akamar that is called the end of the river or something very similar. And there's like the twin stars that he incorporates. There's all of these tiny little things that I was finding in all of my research that I just wanted to tie in as somebody from the perspective of someone who is a pretty amateur astronomer, but's trying pretty hard to impress someone who knows what they're talking about. Which I thought, as an amateur astronomer, I thought I was pretty well suited to do so.
Maddie has a follow-up question, which is, will you ever write a sequel from Scorpius's point of view?
Well, I have no current plans to write a sequel, but I am working on a prequel. that is mostly from Albus's point of view, but a slight spoiler, there are 2 chapters that take place from Scorpius's point of view in the prequel. So we can see what he sees of this whole situation, their relationship as it grows.
And I don't want you to spoil too much. You can tell me to shut up if there's too many spoilers in this. But I know from your notes and obviously from reading the story that most of this story actually takes place after school. So is the prequel, we can take it evolving during school, like in Hogwarts, or is it an earlier stage of quote unquote post grad?
The story, the prequel, is actually takes place entirely in their 7th year. So it is pre Scorpius and Albus's relationship, but they are friends at the time, and it chronicles the way they came together.
Okay. We have another question in the chat from Lexi, who asks, "Who is your favorite secondary character?" And you can go ahead and I guess answer as to this story, and I will seek clarification in the meantime if it is directed at that, if I've gotten it totally wrong, and she's asking broadly about everyone in the series.
Well, my favorite secondary character in the timeline of this story is definitely Albus's first boyfriend, Scotty Hopkins, who I think he's very understanding because I tried very hard not to villainize him in any way, just because he isn't one half of the ending pairing. I didn't want to turn him into this guy that is going to be trashed. He treated him terribly and he has to recover from him. I wanted it to be more of a he just wasn't the one, but that doesn't make him
Right.
a bad guy or a bad character.
Yeah, I will say in novelizing one of my stories, that's one of the big things that I wanted to change to, because I think that deliberation and handling it that way feels like it's largely more true to life than blow ups and infidelity and meltdowns that we uh, typically see in on screen or in books, etc.
Yeah, I do like to give things more of a nuanced, maybe not everything is the most dramatic it could possibly be.
Yeah, we do have that follow up answer from Lexi, and she was indeed asking, sort of overall, who is your secondary slash minor character in the series?
Okay, so in the entire series, I'd say, well, I don't. If Neville counts as a secondary character, then I would say Neville, and if he
Okay.
doesn't, then I would say Theodore Nott.
So you are officially of the Not fan club. I will use this opportunity to allow you to be a spokesperson for all Theodore Not fans, and relay for me, or attempt to relay for me, um, the fascination.
I think the fascination with Theodore Nott comes from the idea that a lot of the Slytherin characters we see in the books are such a tight knit group. In that you see Pansy, you see Crab and Goyle, and you see Draco, and they stick together. Even Blaze, they all seem to stick together, and you kind of see their personalities and what they're like. And Theodore Nott's one of the only named Slytherin students that we kind of see sticking to himself, kind of keeping himself away from their sort of bullying ways that they were into in school. And I think that
Mhm.
leaves open a lot of interpretations of, well, maybe Theodore Nott didn't agree with the way they were. Maybe he was the Slytherin that maybe would have rebelled against, the Caros. He maybe would have done things differently. And it's definitely projecting things onto him more so than anything that was on the page. But I certainly think he can be an interesting character.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, now I'll know. That makes a lot of sense. A lot of things make a lot of sense, I guess, when you actually think about them, right? But one of the other questions that I had out of reading the story was, you really took the kind of house characteristic of Slytherin, that's not, I guess, recognized by a lot of people in terms of loyalty. Um, was that something that you felt organically came out in the way that that the friends were reacted or were going to react, or was that something that you deliberately wanted to put in the story?
Well, I knew that I had to do something with Slytherin House because it was originally written for the Slytherin centric challenge. So I wasn't sure what sort of Slytherin traits could come out of a story like this, and it took me a while of thinking of what could I do? What could I make it so that this is a specifically Slytherin story? And I think it just came naturally out of my idea that it wouldn't be a story where their close friends and family would, shun them in any way. And it made me realize that it was a Slytherin trait to hold on to those close to you, even, at the expense of everyone else in the world. So I thought that it tied in well with the challenge and where I was going, and I just ran with it.
Any connection toward the infamous Tumblr sorting hat chats and their conceptions of Slytherin House?
I didn't consciously incorporate it, but I can't say that some of that may not have been in the back of my mind because I'm very familiar.
Well, generally, I always like to leave it with our author to close with anything that I have missed, or that the public out there watching in the stream may have missed. Anything else you'd like to share with us about the story, its origins, the writing, anything at all?
I think that one thing I would like to share about the origins of the story is that it was very inspired by Laura or Aphrodite, and their manner of writing prose has very deeply seeped into just what I think of as writing. Um, so definitely, if you like this story, I would 100% recommend everything she's ever written.
Yeah, shout out to Laura for sure. I actually do remember seeing that in your author's note. But another absolutely incredible writer in terms of prose. Um, but I want to thank you very much for joining us. We always love to have the authors with us live to give uh, their perspective rather than me bumbling around with my own thoughts and perspectives that may or may not be accurate, or even interesting. So thank you so much for taking the time out to be with us. And if you did not have the chance to read the story, anybody watching now or in the future, there's a link in the description for the video. For the actual story, which was How Long by Joey, aka Crestwood, and this has been Kevin, aka Title Dragon. with hpfanfictalk.com, signing off.